Hello and welcome to JPod. This is a podcast on journalists and journalism. My name is Krishna Prasad and it's great to see you here. India has at least half a dozen business newspapers in English and just as many business news channels. Every newspaper in every language in every part of the country has a page or half a page dedicated to business news. Yet, when the exodus of migrant laborers began from the big cities after the lockdown was announced, the media was as surprised by their movement as those consuming its output. Suddenly, everybody began scampering around looking for information and insight and analysis. Thankfully, the Tablighi Jamaat congregation in Delhi emerged or was produced to distract attention from the humanitarian crisis. Left to fend for themselves by a government which gave them exactly 4 hours to reach home before it shut down buses and trains and planes, millions crisscrossed the country on foot, on cycles, on boats, virtually on a wing and a prayer. It's been called the greatest internal transmigration in India's history, even bigger than the one during partition. Many have died in accidents. Many were not so lucky, hunger killing them before apathy did. As media houses continued to practice stenography and hoped for the sake of the government that the situation would blow over, it took independent journalists to draw attention to the horrifying situation. The only person in India's vast media firmament unlikely to have been surprised either by the government or the media or the migrants is my guest for JPod today, P. Sainath. Working on a fellowship provided by the Times of India, Sainath probed life in India's poorest districts, and the stories he wrote became the landmark book Everybody Loves a Good Drought, which has been reprinted 43 times. As a long-time rural affairs editor of The Hindu, Sainath chronicled the deep distress in India's countryside, the suicide of farmers being just one of them. In 2007, Sainath was awarded Asia's most prestigious prize, the Magsaysay Award. The trustees recognized his passionate commitment as a journalist to restore the rural poor to India's consciousness. Sainath has since set up the People's Archive of Rural India to fill the blanks in the media coverage of 2/3 of India's population. What it also does in the process is to record and document the everyday experiences of everyday people. Everyday people like migrant laborers, some of whom have only just reached home after 70 days of hell. In this extra long episode of JPod, Sainath thinks aloud on how India's grand media tradition has reached this sorry pass, addresses the new labor laws, and answers questions from a select audience. Good morning, Mr. Sainath. This must be a very busy and stressful time for you and your colleagues at PARI, the People's Archive of Rural India. And I thank you so very much for joining me on this episode of this podcast, which is called JPod. I thank you very much, sir.
My pleasure, KP. And yeah, we are sort of bogged down in the amount of work that's happening. But I'm very glad to be with you this morning on the podcast.
I am really, truly grateful. Thank you so much. Sainath Garu, for over 25 years now, you have been the country's leading journalistic voice, speaking and writing on issues that confront rural India, the real India in a way, which we in the cities and those of us who are employed by corporate media look away from or are kind of not interested in. What have been your key learnings, Mr. Sainath, in the last 69 days? What has really surprised you? What has shocked you?
Where the media are concerned, KP, a lot has shocked me, but I can't say that it has surprised me. Take three things. One, on March 26th, the mainstream, so-called mainstream or corporate media discovered migrant laborers. Yes. Now, it's not as if those migrant laborers came, a month before or 3 months before. From the time of the 2011 census, we have been aware that there have been record migrations and, human movement in the country. Right. 454 migrants in the country. Okay, a big chunk of that you take out as women who got married and went from one village to another. But interstate migrations, the 2011 census says 54 million people, which is a huge underestimate because
Right.
the census does not record short-term migrations, circular migrations, or footloose migrations. It doesn't.
Right.
It's not geared to that. It's a great document. I love the Census of India, but it's not geared for that. Second,
Absolutely.
if you look,
Yeah.
uh, when you know all this was happening in the country for 20 years, that the migrations, the number of people traveling, I used to measure this when I was with the Hindu, and in fact for 3-4 years later also, but not on that scale. By doing bus journeys with migrants, you will find many pieces in the Hindu: bus to
Absolutely.
Mumbai, or bus to Kutta from Kerala, bus to Mumbai from Telangana, and the number of buses was going from, say, in Telangana, in Mehboob Nagar, from one bus a week to 45 buses a week.
Right.
In Kutta, from 0 buses, Manantawadi to Kutta, it suddenly went to 24 bus services. So
Right.
obviously, something gigantic was going on, but we never asked the questions. Why are people leaving their villages? It's much more important than asking why they're going back.
Right.
And but we never had a full-time correspondent on this issue involving, tens of millions of people. We never
Right.
had correspondents assigned to travel with migrants to understand what the hell was going on in the countryside.
Mm.
And third, I know you are also very familiar, having worked in Delhi decades, with the institution called CMS, the Center for Media Studies of N. Bhaskara Rao.
Absolutely.
Now, they derived data from their tables for me on questions I posed. And we have learned, at least 3 years ago, we have learned that the average national daily, and of course, I won't get it, you'll not stop laughing if I tell you how a national daily is defined.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. So uh, the average national daily dedicates or gives 0.67% of its front page news to news of rural origin, where
Wow.
69% of the population live. Oh, by the way, that 0.67%, in my estimate, is a huge exaggeration for a very simple reason. It is a 5-year average.
Right.
Now, one of those 5 years, KP, is election year, when the coverage shoots up, okay, because that's where the damn votes are.
Mm.
Now, if I suspect that when you remove, if you take a one-off year, as CMS did for me, if you remove the election year and take a non-election year, it varied between 0.18 and 0.24%.
Yes.
Yeah, so that even the coverage of rural India in the uh, election year, a lot of it was about the prime minister visiting some place or some celebrity arriving at some place, much more than about the people of that place and what they were saying. So
Absolutely.
with that kind of minuscule thing, remember, I joined journalism in 1980 when every newspaper had a labor correspondent, every single one.
Absolutely.
And an agricultural correspondent in those days actually covered farming. I mean, if you
Absolutely.
went to you were a rookie with a Hindu, you had to begin your way from some little town in some little district and work your way up. And so that you got to know your society, you had to cover the mandi, you had to cover the farming operation, you had to cover the sale. You had to do these things. You had to
Yeah.
actually cover farming.
Yeah.
Today, there is no farming correspondent. There are a number of people called agriculture correspondents whose primary job is to cover the agriculture ministry. Sometimes, if it's someone like Pawar, you just cover the agriculture minister.
Yeah.
And in the last 10 years, I'm finding that the agriculture correspondent is also covering significantly
Mm.
agribusiness. So
Yeah.
you're talking about, you're not really, we don't have a farming correspondent looking at things from the perspective of the farmer and the farm laborer.
Right.
So you don't have You don't have correspondence. You by decision, you have taken you have taken a decision by default to say that 75% of the population don't make news,
Absolutely.
except at election time.
Yeah.
You need them at that time. You use them. You dispose of them. Now, when you're doing this, it shouldn't surprise you. When we are doing this, it shouldn't surprise you that they haven't a clue of the kinds of migrant laborers, short-term migrants, long-range migrants, long-term migrants like me, and that they don't have that sensibility, and I don't blame them. I also want to say that there are hundreds of journalists in those very media, hundreds who are
Correct.
perfectly capable of covering it. I would also say there are hundreds who would give an arm and a leg to be able to do that kind of journalism. But that's not what the media structures want. And that's why the last 20 years, I make a clear distinction between media and journalism. So
Yeah.
I'm not shocked with I'm shocked with how they're behaving, but not surprised.
Well, I'm very happy you say that, because on your website, you very clearly talk of the quote unquote the complete failure of the corporate media to cover 2/3 of the country's population. So when you say this, I'm not surprised. I know this for a fact. But the irony, of course, is in this country where barely a percent or a couple of percent of people invest in the stock market. There are 6 business newspapers and 6 business news channels. But as you say on your website, and as you've just described, for so many people whose lives and livelihood depend on the farms, on the on agriculture, etc., there's really no coverage. So when you say what you're saying, Mr. Sainath, is that because the organizations have completely changed form, or is it because they are just bowling to the market that they're appealing to, or what is it that is causing this kind of complete disproportionality in the coverage?
I think the two things are very related. The organizations have changed in some significant ways in the last 25, 30 years. And that has put them on the track of bowling to their markets, what they perceive as their markets. Now just consider one little thing that has happened in the last 4 weeks, 5 weeks. Not a little thing, a gigantic thing, but so little for them as not to even be mentioned in their columns.
Right.
KP, my estimate is that not less than 1,000 journalists have lost their jobs since March 25th.
Absolutely.
The Hindustan Times has dispensed with 27% of its staff. Something like 150 people.
Yeah.
Okay. Vikatan in Tamil Nadu. Okay,
Yeah.
not one of the giant groups of the country, but it has dispensed with 175 people. Now you're not reading about this, and these publications are going about it in a way where they are asking their correspondents to resign,
Yeah.
so that for what reasons, to save some money and to save some face,
Yeah.
right? So they are doing that. Then there have been a large Sakal Times has closed in Goa. A very large number of correspondents from different groups have been dropped. Now, just consider at the very time that the public needs them the most,
Yeah.
you're throwing out journalists.
Yeah.
At the very time they're most needed. Now, I can understand that some small publications, small groups, struggling groups have to make some compromises with their staff on this issue.
Yeah.
I can understand that there are groups who didn't want to do anything, but who have actually shut down totally. Okay.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
with the big guys, KP, we are talking about some of the most profitable companies in India or anywhere.
Yeah.
Companies whose profit lines would be the envy of those top 30 guys in the Sensex. And give you a number, March 19, the projection as of March 19, we know that this country's media and entertainment industry, as I said, they changed form. It is very much one industry, media and entertainment. And most of our media themselves, news media, see how much they focus on entertainment. Now, this media and entertainment industry, the then Minister of Information and Broadcasting presented a paper somewhere, and that excellent book on the Indian media business also gives you the number. It was worth 2 trillion rupees or $26 billion. Now, as you know, there are thousands and God knows how many publications and channels, but the bulk of that is for a handful. The bulk of that account for a handful of them account for the greatest chunk of that 2 trillion. Now, you're having this kind of money, and you are noticing your hearts are bleeding all over your columns on the poor people in distress. And you're throwing out people at 24 hours notice.
Correct.
And telling them resign so that we don't have to pay you extra and so that we don't look stupid and don't look like gorillas in the public eye. So this, I think, is a very telling factor. Now, what were the changes? Actually, let me say this for your audience, that I think that almost 200 years of Indian journalism in the modern sense, I don't count Hickey's Gazette and such, scandal sheets and tabloids. I think in 2022 we will complete 200 years, which I date to the founding of Raja Ram Mohan Roy's Miratul Akbar. And I'm sorry to hurt the feelings of my Bengali friends, but the paper was not in Bengali, it was in Persian. Miratul Akbar was, that was the court language of the Mughal. And that was the elite language of the time. Everybody adapted to that. So he did, of course, publish a hell of a lot in Bengali, but Miratul Akbar was 1822. And look at, I am proud of this. I am proud of Indian journalism, and otherwise we may not have become one, because for about 150 to 170 years of that 200, which we will complete in 2022, a guy starts this paper from day one. He sees the role of a journalist as having a social function, a social role. He's talking about widow remarriage, female infanticide, every single burning social issue he is trying to grapple with, sometimes successfully, sometimes unsuccessfully, but he's focused on it. Your journalists include a Raja Ram Mohan Roy, a Gandhi, an Ambedkar, and a hell of a lot of people don't realize it, a Bhagat Singh. Even in Punjab, he's treated as a martyr, but he was professionally a journalist. Mind you, this guy wrote in 4 languages, in public, 4 different languages, was learning a 5th when he was hanged at age 23. I began journalism at age 23. Okay, it's just stunning to me that a young guy could, be writing in the Akali magazine in Punjabi, in Kirti in Urdu or Hindi, in Veer Pratap in Hindi, in other journals in English, Hindi, English, Urdu, Punjabi, and he was learning Persian. Okay, so it's just, I think that this should be a sort of aspirational mark to be that multilingual journalist. Some of us have the privilege, like I do, of getting translated into 12 languages, but it is so much more noble and great to be able to write in those languages.
Absolutely.
So I think this is not a tradition to be ashamed of, ours. There is plenty to be ashamed of, and it comes up with the coming of communal formations. And of course, much of what we call the Indian media was actually apologia for the British Empire, like the Times of India was.
Yeah.
It was British owned. I'll never forget in 1841 there was an editorial. Okay,
mm,
we Indians are truly blessed, KP, because
mm.
not only are we ruled by by European gentlemen, we are ruled by British gentlemen. It could have
Yeah.
been French, you know. So I mean, they actually say this. They actually say this, right? I'll send you the scan of that.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
and so, on the one hand, you have that kind of tradition, but you have a tradition. I hate using the word now because our, in our times we have given Indian nationalism a bad name, right?
yeah. Mm,
But
mm.
you look at the Tilaks, the Gandhis, the Ambedkars, and the kind of power in that journalism, and what made it different was moral authority.
Absolutely.
I absolutely believe this, that this was moral authority journalism.
Yeah.
And remember, and then again, the second characteristic of that journalism and that tradition was a link, an organic link, if you like, between the illiterate masses and these people trying to voice and articulate the aspirations of the masses. Hmm.
Yeah.
When when Tilak was sentenced, for 6 years in the Mandalay prison, when Tilak was, convicted of sedition, KP, it was not the Ambanis, the Godrejs, and Birlas who came on the streets to protest and defend his right to freedom of expression. It was the mill workers of Mumbai.
Yeah.
22 people died of police firing. 22. 16 died the same day as
Wow.
police opened fire. Now, those people who were protesting may not have been able to read Tilak, but they knew him. And they knew he was saying what they were trying to say.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, this is a fantastic thing. You'll find hundreds of such examples, maybe not all so spectacular, but you'll find hundreds of such examples of the masses coming to the defense of the journalist. It's something that makes me truly humble and proud when I think about it. Now,
Well, the paradox, of course, is that much of what is now happening is blamed on market forces. It's blamed on the liberalization that happened. But the irony, as compared to what you just mentioned about Tilak, is that the very people who are supporting these publications or TV stations or whatever, they are the first people to boycott these newspapers because of a fear of contamination, which is the oddest part here.
yeah, well, yeah, but there are a couple of other things that went with this. So when we joined, when I joined journalism, the process of concentration of media had begun. I think there is only one parallel to Indian journalism of the great tradition, and that was in the United States, 18th century.
Mm.
Okay? Sheer boisterous diversity that it had. However, one great difference I see, I studied US journalism of that period and our own. Both had a common thing in the anti-colonial tradition.
Exactly.
But in the US media, in the US press, United States press, freedom meant the freedom of the white, adult, propertied male.
Mm.
The same newspapers that spoke eloquently for freedom referred to Native Americans as vermin. Yeah. Blacks were not human beings. Yeah. So they were in an inferior subrace. They were not human beings at all. Now, but same paper, look, Thomas Jefferson, who supposedly authored the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident, all men are equal, blah, 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 had 137 slaves who he did not free even in his will.
Correct.
In India, India began in 1947 with universal franchise.
Correct.
Okay? Your media, your press, the Ram Mohan Roys, the Gandhis, the Ambedkars, very importantly the Ambedkars, the Bhagat Singhs, they, all of them, had a much nobler vision and idea of what freedom was and who it
mm,
was. Okay,
mm,
so I'm
mm,
proud of that. Then
mm,
this diversity starts dying off. One, after independence, the a generation moves and you have that kind of idealism dying. Okay, there is no uniting common colonial enemy, for one thing. Second, the media, a process of concentration begins. Okay,
mm,
in the 1880s, the Hindu, the original brothers who started that, they had a capital of 5 rupees, okay? And
mm.
then borrowed five
Yeah.
from here, five from there, and started a newspaper. You can't buy the Sunday edition of the paper with that 5 rupees.
Yeah.
And and uh, the concentration process begins. You know, your listeners should know that there have been two press commissions in this country, one in 1954, one in 1977, which was dismantled because of the whole emergency imbroglio and chaos, and reconstituted in 1980. Both these commissions, you know, they were not headed by radical, fiery, radical leftists. They were headed by conservative, retired Supreme Court judges and the like.
Mm,
And you will see how much of the discussion, including by the commission itself, is over the fact that they felt, many of them felt, that the greatest threat to freedom of press in India comes from business house ownership.
mm,
And many people, in fact, put forward submissions asking for a delinking of the two.
mm.
Two press commissions went through this. Okay.
Yeah.
And it was a very serious debate. Now, as the concentration grows, you see the wisdom of those discussions when what happens, you know, the number of owners is shrinking. Today, the biggest media owner in the country is also the richest Indian in the world and in the top 30 or 40 rich individuals in the world. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, second thing about Indian super rich and billionaires is the organic connection to the state. In the sense, you'll find that there has been some degree of work on this in the Economic and Political Weekly in the EPW. Many Indian billionaires are what we call rent thick billionaires, meaning I, if I am a rent thick billionaire, I'm someone who has captured public resources by striking a contract with the government of India. Therefore, I'm
Correct.
given so many blocks of oil exploration, so many blocks of oil and natural gas exploration, so many mines, so much cleared forest. I'm actually getting public resources into my hands, you know, the privatization process. Second, not only do I get that, I then subcontract to
Mm,
hundreds and thousands. I am actually living on a rent of public resources, and that's where my wealth comes from. I think one paper in the EPW had counted that 43, when it was 94 billionaires, 43 of them were what you call rent thick billionaires.
yeah.
So you're having this. Now, why the heck am I going to confront a
Mm,
government in power when the
mm,
whole source of my wealth is in having a crony equation with them? I mean, they are the cronies. The government will become the cronies. But
mm,
I don't want to be thrown out of that money-making route. So as then the second thing was in when we began journalism, there were still newspapers that were the only business the owner had. There were newspapers where a person ran a newspaper and that was all the business that he had. And that person was dedicated to that business. What he or she earned, they poured back into the newspaper, and that's how they went. Now, a major newspaper owner has 200 other interests. Just start listing the if I start listing the industries for you, your podcast program will be over. By the, by the time we cross, say, the alphabet E,
yeah. Yeah.
agriculture, aviation, etc. So you have that problem. That sort of, then the third thing is that the hyper commercialization. we reduced, that's why I make a distinction between media and journalism. Hyper commercialization was everything is judged by revenue. We reduce the media to a revenue stream. Okay. Once you do that, I will cover Krishna Prasad if there is money to be made in covering Krishna Prasad.
Absolutely.
I will cover migrant laborers if either I don't have an option because the sky is falling on our heads, or if I get money out of covering migrant laborers, I make revenue. When I don't make revenue out of somebody, they are unimportant to me because I am no longer a newspaper. I am an industry. I have to make my profit. I have to show this kind of profit to my shareholders. So the transformation, the corporatization of the media has advanced very, very far in a period of rising fundamentalism as well. And there is a merger of much of this. I believe we are the only country in the world which has television channels who cover the neighboring country more than they cover their own. All they do is cover Pakistan.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
this is where you're at. And the
Yeah.
form changed, and with it, the objectives of media have changed. I still make a distinction between, I make a very strong distinction between media, which is a business, newspapers, a business, radio stations, a business, whatever. Journalism is not a business. Journalism is a calling.
Totally. I totally agree with you on that. In fact, I had a long chat with Shashi Kumar, our friend from the Asian College of Journalism, and we actually sparred quite a bit on the same topic. But Mr. Sainath, to come back to this core issue of the migrant crisis, I saw that in an earlier interview you had given last month, you were quite critical of the English language media, which did not name some 16 migrants who were crushed to death while they were sleeping under a train in Aurangabad. Thankfully, I think one of the newspapers, the Indian Express, later did some kind of a course correction and named victims of a bus accident in Uttar Pradesh. So there was some action because of what you said. But how do you think the media has fared with this migrant crisis compared to your core competency, which has been covering farmer suicides and so on? Has there been a substantial shift? Has there been any comparative changes? Anything that you noticed which is slightly, on the positive side?
There are many things I see on the positive side. See I think that the media have come in for a very serious dose of reality therapy. But please also notice, let's not exaggerate it in the sense that the same newspapers that have woken up to the scale of, or we don't know even now what the scale of it is, the same newspapers and channels are laying off, are shedding journalists like confetti.
Correct.
So that said, I am looking at the positives. As I said, even in the worst of the newspapers and channels, are journalists, young and maybe not so young, who have been dying to do some journalism that connects them with their society, with their people, and have not had the opportunity for it under the structures which do not keep any major beat on the social sector. Now, I find those people energetically trying to cover what's going on, even if some of it does not get published. Okay, that's one thing. It's having a great impact on the minds of journalists and particularly young journalists. So that's a real positive. In my own experience here, otherwise the second difference is that of scale. Yeah. Even in the height of the farm suicides, KP, we had. Let me tell you what actually happened in the Times of India. At that time, the Hindu was covering, meaning I was covering Vidarbha and Marathwada big time, and the Hindus coverage was getting reproduced by Marathi newspapers the local editions of where I was working. Okay.
Right.
The time, a lot of journalists in Times of India, young people, were deeply moved by what they were seeing on the suicides, on the farm distress. It's not as if they were indifferent. Those journalists asked their management, they asked their leadership, why cannot we go out and cover it when a Chennai based newspaper is doing all this?
Mm.
Why cannot we? They made that argument. This is what they were told. I think there was a written memo on it. Okay. Dying farmers in Vidarbha do not buy the Times of India. The elites of Sobo do.
Mm.
Okay. I mean, it was a clear. I admire that statement for its honesty. It said, we don't give a damn. Okay.
Yeah.
So that was the thing. So the attitude, I'm saying, the goodness in journalists, in many journalists, was there then too. People tried.
Right.
Now the reality is not allowing you to look away. Here's what I think of COVID-19.
Mm.
I think that COVID-19 has presented us with a complete, total, thorough, unsparing autopsy of our development in the last 30 years.
Absolutely.
It has, the difference this time is that you cannot look away.
Mm.
Some of us could still look away after demonetization. We can't look away now. The fire is at your door. So we can't. After a while, I also want to tell you that how little history appears in the media because they have never taken an interest in it. KP, this is not the first time lakhs of people have fled Mumbai city, for instance.
Correct.
In 1896, 1897, between 97 and 1905, half the population of Bombay fled the bubonic plague. The population of Mumbai at that time was 8.5 lakhs. 4 lakh people fled it.
Wow.
Now, I'm saying, KP, there are newspapers who were existing in that period. You would think that somebody could pull out the bloody archives and tell us about it.
Yeah.
And they have digitized their archive.
Yeah.
They have digitized their old copies. 4 lakh people. So who were these people? Mostly, I mean, in these 4 lakh were a very large numbers of mill workers. Who were the mill workers? They were migrants from Konkan area, first of all from the Konkan, and then from other parts of Maharashtra, and later in the 1914s, 15s, a large number of people come from other parts of the country as well. But the main flow of migrants was the Konkan area. When this happened, people, that people were subjected to exactly the same kind of treatment.
I see.
Under lockdown that poor people today are. Their dwellings, that their dwellings were burnt down. They burnt down their dwellings to sanitize them. They sanitized these people. I don't know with what hideous chemicals they used in those days. Not that we are using gentler or nobler ones, but I think our things are probably packed in better bottles. And for 1897, the city was rocked by strikes. Workers went on strikes in protest against the kind of hardship, starvation conditions that they were facing. And finally, 4 lakh people fled the city, including many workers, including many mill workers. How did they return is also another very important question. The mill workers were divided into 2 camps, and you'd be surprised, maybe not, about who was on what side. One camp said, to bring these people back why waste our time? There are lots of starving workers up north. Let's import labor from the north, which, if you remember, was in the 1896 famine. If we get workers from up north and replace these, horrible fellows, let them go back to the Konkan. Another section of mill owners took a more enlightened view, at least enlightened self-interest view, and said this is a wrong thing. We are not going to get people from up north. They're too weak, they're starving, they're whatever, whatever. And by the way, it didn't work, that plan to bring people from the north. Families were dying. Where are people going to leave big time and come? So the second group of mill workers, mill owners said, give them better facilities, give them a more decent earning, build housing for them, give them cheap housing. And that's how the BIT chawls and many of the chawls in Mumbai, the idea of chawls began to come with that. Now, many workers returned with the coming of some housing, not very great. And in fact, the British Parliament intervened, passed a law, the Bombay Improvement Trust, the City of Bombay Improvement Trust. All lands, vacant lands, were handed over to them, to the trust. The government gave its land, the municipality gave its land, and the Bombay Improvement Trust, it unfortunately probably destroyed as many or more dwellings than it created, but it had some idea. The mill owners camp, which was against pampering the workers, so to speak, was led by Tata. And the camp that was saying, give better facilities, give better work, give better conditions to bring them back, induce them to come back, was led by Naurozji Wadia.
I see.
I'm saying all this history is there in your newspapers, okay? I mean, there is this, the Times and other newspapers have this whole period from 1896. That bubonic plague killed 8 million people in your country between 1896 and 1914 when it vanished with the war. So you have, so I'm saying scales are different, but attitudes, KP, a whole generation of young people. I work with young people. The average age of my office is about 24 or 23, but a generation has grown up believing that there is no other journalism but what you get in the supplements of Times. There is a generation that has grown up thinking there is no economics other than neoliberalism, that there is the only economics there is that of the market. You know? So there is a generation that has grown up without looking at other options about other abilities. Now switch back to the present and find in Europe, okay, in Europe and the present, there is a serious rethinking about the economics of the market and countries trying to move back to their welfare state moorings. Spain, Ireland have completely nationalized all health facilities for the duration of the crisis.
Yep.
We didn't do that for a month and 2 months until the Maharashtra government said 80% of all hospital beds. But those countries are rethinking their economics of the last 30 years. We are not. We are going further in that direction. So yeah, these are the differences and the positives that I see from the People's Archive of Rural India. We always got very good young people. We always got that different strand that to connect their society. Now we are overwhelmed with the number of young people, you know, people who are not journalists, people who may be young doctors or, you know, civil society activists wanting to write in Pari because they feel that this platform is listening to the voices of those they are engaging with.
Absolutely.
We have a tunnel full of stuff about those 16 workers who were run over. By the way, we were the first English publication to give their names. At the bottom of a poem by Gokul GK, we gave their names and made this point that nobody ever gives their names. If it had been two people in an aircraft, you would have had their names, right?
Yes.
So that is the difference then and now. Yeah.
You know, what is really remarkable is that a tiny little virus has really shown us that we are a really severely brutalized society. As you said, it has shown up for what we really are, you know, no healthcare facilities, no transport facilities, you know, really, you know, pathetic conditions on the ground, etc.
No
But But for all the propaganda of becoming a $5 trillion economy, which seems to occupy the attention of all our media and the consumers in the cities, we've shown the world that we can't even send people who are the engine of our cities back home with some dignity. That's the really striking part to me. The sight of lakhs of people walking and cycling thousands of kilometers without food, many of them dying of hunger and starvation and exhaustion. Really, as you said, there is a moral issue here which we have turned our eyes away from. And even when it's staring us in the face at this point of time, we seem to have so little empathy. Mr. Sainath, my question to you is a slightly non-journalistic question, which is that this inhumanity you're seeing now is not new. We've seen it before during the Congress too. But I think the really startling part of what I seem to see from this distance is that this is happening under a so-called Hindu nationalist party, which enjoys the support of at least 37% of the people of this country. But you seem to get a sense, and I may be wrong completely here, that Hinduism as we knew it is kind of being reworked on the ground. It's undergoing a kind of a metamorphosis, making it more blunt and inhuman in a way. Am I wrong here in making this conclusion, or do you see any evidence on the ground in the villages, in the rural countryside, which contradicts this generalization?
No, I would say that you're right, that what we understood as Hinduism 30, 40 years ago bears not such a great, there have been major deviations or departures from that. Though I would like to, as a non-religious or irreligious person, I would say that I did not subscribe to what existed 30, 40 years ago either. But what you're seeing in the last 30, 40, what you're seeing, the growth in the last 25 years, is what I call India coming under the rule. This is not specific, political party specific, but more strata specific, political specific, is I believe this country is in the grip and has been for a while under the grip of an alliance. On the two components of this allies are one, socio-religious fundamentalists.
Yeah.
I will not as one is that socio-religious fundamentalists, and on the other are the economic market fundamentalists. There are boundaries which hugely overlap between the two. Our Prime Minister, our Home Minister, the late Mr. Jaitley, are proud Hindu fundamentalists, proud to be declared, but are also huge worshippers at the temple of the market.
Correct.
Right. So this, I think, has influenced our thinking, our direction, our policies, this alliance between socio-religious fundamentalists and economic market fundamentalists. I have something to say about the second group. The first group, all of us are staring them in the face for the last 20 years, wondering when they will stop growing.
Yeah.
So that is one. The other group, the economic market fundamentalists, are your clever boys from Wharton, Harvard, and the IIMs and elsewhere. They are making the mistake that many of them have made in other societies. They think that it's good to go with these guys because we can push our agenda through. They think that they are fully capable of riding the back of the tiger. Yeah. And that they are fully capable of riding the back of the tiger, and they will achieve their objectives and agenda. There is again no sense of history about what happens to the person riding the back of the tiger.
Yeah.
So both these groups have made this a very different country. They've made it a way. Now, what's happening in the countryside? I would still say that there is a great mix in that. The primary identity of a lot of people, and Indians have multiple identities, and I don't see why we can't understand this and live with it, that one can be a proud Tamil and and an Indian. There are multiple identities.
Correct.
The base identity of a lot of people still remains that the currency of unit of currency remains caste. There's no doubt about this, and we shouldn't run away from it. Running away from it means we will never confront it. Okay, so I'm saying that one, like if I ask if I ask a guy in Anantapur working in a field, what are you or who are you? He's not going to say, the first answer he's going to give you is not that I am an Indian or a Telugu or Andhra. He's going to say, "Mem Reddy, sir." Or if I ask that in South Tamil Nadu to a Dalit working in the field and ask him, he will say, "Sir, number SC, sir."
Yeah.
That is the identity that comes to the fore. I believe that we have been fooling ourselves by looking away from this, not understanding what people have been trying to tell us about and that's why the upward surges and movements and protests, I think we should have paid a lot more attention to what the Dalits and the poor OBCs were telling us. That's another conversation. We didn't really learn enough from it. But also you have also the religious, and it's a kind of, the fundamentalist loyalties are something like, football club loyalties, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty much like a rowdy football club loyalty. But there's one huge difference between pre-14 and now. I entirely agree with you that what we are looking at is the culmination of a process, not of the last 2 years or of the last 6 years. That is absolutely true. That is absolutely true. The farm suicides, I've done a comparison between UPA years in power, NDA years in power. There is not much of a difference.
Absolutely.
Okay. But from 2014, we've completely destroyed whatever flawed data existed. That's one thing. The second thing that has happened that has changed politics, affects journalism in every way, is that previously, say in the emergency KP, I was the leader of a students' union. We didn't suffer, very honestly, let me tell you, because we were in the south, we were in Tamil Nadu, there was a DMK government in power, and we spent a lot of our time fighting with the DMK.
Yeah.
When they were dismissed, we learned, we were rudely educated on what the emergency was.
Yeah.
But I would say we did not suffer much. Two differences. One is, we did not suffer much, but like our colleagues and counterparts in the north, unlike them, we did not suffer much, but it mattered to us that others did. Because the word justice meant something to everybody, not just to those denied it.
Exactly.
The movements of 60s, 70s, and 80s were led by the movements of the oppressed, were led by people who were neither oppressed nor affected, but who had a sense of justice. Yeah.
Exactly. That's where I came from, which is this. One of the reasons why I asked you about the rural countryside is this issue of empathy. If we in the media are not covering stories, that's because there is some visible lack of empathy. Similarly, when you read some of these stories that are appearing now, or when you see some of these stories, you can see a very visible lack of empathy, which you would not associate with really true blue Hindus. That's what I was meaning to say. I mean, we can keep talking about this, but to see a man cycle on a tricycle from Delhi to Bihar, a handicapped man tricycle on a bike with one hand, and to think that he was not stopped anywhere for 1,000 kilometers, or offered food or shelter, or told to just stay here till things improve. It really is very disturbing when you look at it from a distance. It just tells you that deep down, there's something really funny that's happening, that's changed our mindset.
I would,
Perhaps, yeah,
I
sorry.
would, I would say that there's too many nuances to that. One is that I believe that empathy and compassion is not restricted. It's not the monopoly of any one religious group or social cultural group. You have in India a tradition going back to the time of the viharas, from which Bihar draws its name, of voluntarism, of helping people, of serving people. I see that even now,
Yeah.
because poor people who are not having things are sharing their stuff with each other. You saw the chief minister of Mizoram the other day
Yeah.
talking about thanking the people of Bihar who went to the station to give food,
Yeah.
to help the Mizos in
Yeah. Yeah.
distress.
Yeah.
So I believe that fundamental goodness is there, but I believe that the nature of capitalist development, not only in India but in the world, has atomized us.
Mm.
We do
Mm.
not know the names of our neighbors in the same
Mm.
apartment building. We have no clue what work they do. We have no
Right.
clue where they're working. We go out, we work, we come back to our apartment and flat. There's been an isolation and an atomization that has happened. And the
And
lack of empathy also comes up from growing in an atmosphere in some sections that of selfishness, of a consumer-led growth and development, of consumerist-led development, which makes you think in terms of me, my family, our betterment, all of that. Yeah.
mm.
So that I think is how do we create. I believe I've been teaching journalism for since '84. Okay,
Mm.
my fifth year.
Yeah.
I believe in those. I believe that when those kids come there first, hmm, they are absolutely uh, idealistic. I've not seen one group where I did not see great idealism, and that's why they come to journalism. Otherwise, they'd go to advertising or to filmmaking, or I mean, they'd go to other money-making prospects. But they come here. People come to journalism because they want to connect with their society. They want to do great things. They want to set wrongs right. I believe it's there. They go into the newspapers and channels, and that idealism is beaten out of their heads in 3 years.
Mm.
That is, I
Mm.
think, the environment we constructed. But lastly, on that point, before I talk to you about Pari, is about just consider again. I go back to the great Darbar of Victoria, of the
Mm.
great Darbar in India. KP, the worst affected in the famine of that period was Mysore. Okay,
Mm.
the Mysore Madras route. In that zone, 140,000 people died of hunger, and this country could hold a darbar with 68,000 guests, mainly royalty. In other words, the elite of your society.
Yeah.
And do you know that people were falling dead on the highways, and people from Mysore, people from the countryside running to Mysore city and to Madras city were clubbed to death by police at the barricades. Okay,
Mm. Mm.
uh, and and you will find that the newspapers of the time reported both the magnificence of the darbar, these people being beaten at the barricades. At least they reported that, which was better than what some of us have done. You know, they, but KP, they made no connection between the two.
Mm.
They
Mm.
reported them as if these were two separate processes. The darbar, you know, it's somewhat, there's a resemblance to the darbar for Donald Trump in Ahmedabad, while people were in panic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I think there are parallels. I think there are differences. I believe in the basic goodness of young people who have grown up wanting to do something, but I also recognize that they come up without a single. Each generation I'm seeing knows less and less of its history,
Mm.
which is why a large number of people follow a gang of people calling themselves nationalists who
Mm.
made zero contribution to the nationalist movement for independence.
Mm.
and in fact, whose contribution they don't want anyone to look too closely at. And yet, and because I think a generation or two have been robbed of their history. I'm finding that I cannot teach journalism without teaching my students history.
Totally, totally. When you speak of the atomization of our mindset, obviously one key factor at this time would surely be social media and the way it's built, the engineering behind it, which basically, turns this whole global village into a set of small little islands. So each of us is an island. Would you think that this has been a factor, social media, in the way we have become?
I think it has exacerbated and extrapolated a disease and a problem that was already spreading, but it has given it a scope that it never had earlier. Also, I want to say this. We two things. One about the internet. It guarantees you a voice, at least so far. It guarantees you a voice. KP doesn't guarantee that anyone will listen to you.
Exactly.
So when I find people romanticizing, digital media will come to the rescue of media. Boss, it's all owned by the same guys.
Correct.
It's all owned by the same guys. They are looking at it in terms of which of the platforms is yielding them higher forms of profit. If they are doing that, okay, then let's do away with the bloody newspapers. Why are we spending so much money on newsprint and on journalists? So get rid of the journalists. Later get rid of the newsprint. Later get rid of the print edition. All these are decisions are not just naturally happening. They're also consciously worked on decisions. That's one problem. Social media, which I think is one of the most misnamed phenomena in history. Look, the bulk of the voices on social media are paid for. I mean, the ones who are having a lot of traction, a lot of influence, those millions of WhatsApp messages going around the country, painting the coronavirus as, on the one hand, a deep Islamic conspiracy. On the other hand, by the way, in the east of India, where they believe that fish are coming from China are infected with coronavirus. And the fishermen are telling us this, that people are refusing to buy. So look at what this media has done. I'm saying it's owned by the same people. It's owned by the same groups, the same companies, 5 or 6 companies which rule the world of media. And again, it comes back to confronting corporate power. The atomization is entirely in their interest. It is entirely in their interest. Now, when they go for online education and the race is on, as you know, there are media groups in this country that have their own private universities also.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, the next big race is going to be to online education, and the money to be made out of it, they're recalculating their strategies after having built these huge conference rooms and huge structures, physical structures. They are going to use this, A, to do away with more and more teachers. B, by the way, that situation is going to favor guys like you and me because they'll be bringing in freelance lecturers, right?
Yeah.
And do that course and stuff. Why should they take a guy and make him professor and pay him, $150,000 a month or $110,000 a month or whatever it is that they're paying him, when they can give a few of us a few thousand rupees to do a class? So, second, it's going to damage very seriously the socialization process. For me, the idea of the child not having a teacher to socialize with, the classmates to socialize with, that socialization process is one of the most important elements of education since the dawn of education. Third, tens of millions of children in government schools are going to be excluded from this process. The poorest children in the country will be excluded, even if you create virtual classrooms for them, etc. How many of them have smartphones or 4G on which to receive this instruction in the virtual classroom? How many 7-year-old kids do you know, or 8-year-old kids who are going to be able to do that? But it's being looked at purely. Please look at your email inbox and see how many ads and celebratory things there are for Baiju and other apps, and
mm, mm,
it's
mm.
entirely being looked at. It is finally the privatization and commercialization of just about everything, you know.
Yeah,
So
clearly.
that is such a big problem. Now, in the People's Archive of Rural India, we are coming forward with our education platform in a few days from now. First of all, for your listeners, Pari is a multimedia digital space, free access. We don't carry advertising because we don't want to sell more products to your children. We think there's enough of that happening already. We don't take direct government grants. We don't take direct corporate grants. We are trying to give you something that is it unbiased? No, there is nothing in the world that is unbiased. We have our biases. We cover the everyday lives of everyday people, and we try telling you what's happening to them through their, as far as humanly possible, through their own voices, through their own lived experience. If you go up on Pari and key in Jayamma leopard, you will find from your own Karnataka, from the forests of Bandipur, an Adivasi woman who's done a photo essay for us. Several of them. Hmm?
Yeah, yeah.
What brilliant photographs! Not, I mean, they will not be so beautiful as Nat Geo, but the photo essay is 10 times more valuable than anything you get from National Geographic, which gives you beautiful images and teaches you nothing about the people and its forest, their forest.
Mm,
Jayamma is looking at the universe through very different eyes from yours and mine. And therefore, a beautiful essay. She has shot a leopard, a grown male leopard, at 4 meters in the open.
wow.
Yeah. And I'm saying we want to give this alternative education platform within Pari. Pari covers craftspersons. We cover 30, 40 categories of things. We carry labor first and foremost, things we do, the
Mm,
people, other people do, things we make, artisans, craftspersons, and many middle class Indians do not know that handlooms and handicrafts are the second biggest employer in this country after agriculture. Okay.
mm, mm,
Uh,
mm.
Third, so we cover all these, we cover education, but we are now launching within Pari a subdomain and education platform, and in collaboration with Swecha, the free software movement, uh, we are trying to do two things. One is those children who are totally excluded in the government schools, what can we think up for them to have rich material, published material? Can we create intranet experiences for them? We can try that in Andhra Pradesh where Swecha is very strong. Those who are on the net, we have, by the way, already created the only online library in the world dedicated wholly to rural India. Now, for instance, COVID-19 is on. If you go up, you will find 20 documents, reports with value added summaries, factoids, which will tell you what are the new labor laws, what were the labor laws that were suspended, what were in India's major health documents from the time of the Bore Committee of 1946, which wanted this country to build a good health system. You know, so you can go up and look at that. It's the only library that has been working on those lines.
Mm,
And it's meant for young people and students and researchers because we give a summary, we give the factoids, the chief points of the report, which allows a young researcher to know, is this the report I should be reading or
mm,
should I look for something else?
mm,
Third, our content is free. Our content is free. We have no subscriber fee. We run on donations, maybe a tad of CSR when somebody is kind enough to give it to us. But the content is free. There is no subscription fee.
mm.
So we want these students, even in the classrooms, there's going to be great inequality in the virtual classrooms. There will be a very real inequality in virtual world. How do we get good books, good literature, good content, good history to those students who can't afford it? And what we have decided to do is that if we are going to do this, like we do in the rest of PARI, the communities we are covering are deeply involved. We have decided that this section must be driven also by students writing on different subjects.
Mm-hmm.
We've just got in an article of a school student on a couple in Bengaluru. Poor things, these migrant laborers landed at the construction site they were. Yeah, they landed at the construction site they were to work at 24 hours before the lockdown.
Mm-hmm.
What the hell do they do? Yeah, and
I know.
this has come from a high school student.
Yeah.
So we are going to try working on that platform by
Excellent.
directly engaging with the students.
Excellent.
And
So let me just swing into the last few questions, Mr. Sainath, because we are running out of time.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, because labor is the issue we need to talk about. I was wondering very quickly what you made of the transformation of the train, in our consciousness in these last few months. This was a vehicle, such a homely, welcoming vehicle in the past. It's now become something to be fearful of. People dying on trains, people being charged, the poor being charged to travel back home, trains landing up in different locations. And in Bangalore, you had the spectacular scene of the BJP government cancelling trains to keep builders happy. And then you, of course, saw, what was happening in Surat with all these diamond workers protesting 4 or 5 times so visibly. So the question to you, in very briefly, is bonded labor, quote unquote, in a way back in India in this new age?
I have gone on record saying that the ordinance of Uttar Pradesh and of some other states was a proclamation of bonded labor by ordinance. It was a proclamation of. I'm also saying that the kind of suspension of labor laws, nowhere else in the world has someone suspended 38 labor laws.
Yeah.
Third, when we 5 states, including 2 Congress states and 3 BJP states, have extended working hours from 8 to 12. Yes. Now here again is a bunch of people with zero knowledge of history. Do you know that? Well, one, you are going against every convention that India is party to on labor. And in fact, some of those conventions were even pioneered by Indians like Ambedkar, the kind of spirit of it, those laws, etc. You have reversed the gold standard of labor legislation of 100 years in destroying the 8-hour day, number one. Number two, 3 of those states have denied overtime for the next 4 hours. Yes. It's to be paid at pro rata basis, no overtime for those 4 hours. Those, of course, are Gujarat, UP, Madhya Pradesh. Gujarat, Uttar Pradesh, and Madhya Pradesh. Then, Gujarat Chamber of Commerce was the first, of course, in the country, we shouldn't be surprised, to write to the Chief Minister demanding that no union formation should be allowed for a year. No union activity. Now, incidentally, when I said that these are morons who have no sense of history, why did the capitalist world accept the 8-hour day? One, the struggles of the workers were intense, immense. It saw revolutions in some countries. Yeah. That was one reason. The workers won that victory. And in fact, the welfare states that emerged in Europe were largely a result of working class struggles. However, in the United States, 2 capitalist groups embraced the 8-hour workday for a very simple reason. Many of them did studies, KP, which showed that after 8 hours, the productivity actually tapers off. So you will be paying more for less.
Yeah. Yeah.
Your pro rata payment will be more for less.
Yeah.
Ford Motor Company was one of the early companies to accept the 8-hour work. It, they had the evidence of studies done which showed that 12 hours that worker is not, after 8 hours the worker is exhausted. You will find that that is going to have a deleterious effect on your productivity. So this was the reason that many capitalists accepted it. They understood that this is not going to make us more money. Here, that cruelty of approach, or even the lack of sophistication in it, is let's work them to the bone. If they die, they die. That's what's going to happen. This is what is happening with labor laws. I'm also pointing out to your listeners that we had a speaking 5 times on television up to May 31st, from mid-March to May 31st, speaking 5 times on television, in the talking about frontline warriors, and yes, there will be some hardship. And in the first 4 speeches, he does not mention the word laborer nor migrant laborer, when the whole world is watching the phenomenon of the migrant laborers march in the country.
Mm.
In the fifth speech, possibly because of the amount of criticism about this, he mentions the word migrant laborer once and the word laborers or workers 3-4 times. But it took, it took till May 31st to even acknowledge there was a migrant laborer in this process. 4 speeches without mentioning him. Second, look at how, if COVID-19 gave us an autopsy of Indian society, it also gave us a brain scan of elite thinking and brain scan of our media thinking. Look at the fact that on March, nobody has made a big deal of it, that on
Mm.
March 31st, the Union Home Secretary and the Solicitor General went on record, the latter in the Supreme Court, to say there is not a single migrant on the streets.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Not a single migrant on the streets. 12 days later, they were saying there were 1.3 million people in 1.4 million in camps, and 1.3 crore people were going to food camps. And that was the data as they could gather it, which was very incomplete. Okay. So, I mean, then about your trains. Then we say, hey guys, don't panic, don't run. We will arrange trains for you. And we arrange trains. And then we charge them full fare. People are borrowing money. They're going into debt, families, taking 4,000, 6,000 rupees to buy their bloody train tickets if they're a family of 7, 8 or whatever they are. And then they don't know when they'll travel. The registration process, we don't know. The same people who told you that there wasn't a single migrant about, then tell on May 28th, tell the Supreme Court 9.1 million people have been transported since the Shramik trains began. Now we just look at where are we? Where is the accountability? Where is the media's accountability that we don't jump on this and point out? Listen, you guys told us that there wasn't a single migrant on the streets. Here is a big problem in our history, KP.
Mm.
We will never know. We will never know how many millions of human beings hit the streets between March 26th and May 1. After May 1, we have a glimmering, as some state governments, Kerala is an exception, but we have a glimmering when governments explicitly ask their district administrations to tend to migrants. We have a sense of numbers. We don't have the numbers. We have a sense. March 26 to May 1, we have no bloody idea of how many millions of people. And we will never know this.
Yeah. So let me ask you the last question. Obviously, some of the things you mentioned, the irony is that the extension of working hours was proposed by a media darling called Narayan Murthy. Secondly, I'm sure you've noticed many of the editorials in newspapers,
Yeah.
especially the Bombay-based newspapers, supporting these so-called labor reforms as saying that they're required and essential. So that's where we are. But let's keep that aside. But let me ask you this very last question, Mr. Sainath. During the middle of this pandemic, the Reporters Without Borders advocacy group produced its 2020 World Press Freedom Index, and India figured at 142. And I'm sure you were not surprised by that. So let me just ask you very quickly and simply, why have we reached this number of 142? Why has critical questioning vanished besides all the factors you mentioned? And why has it become so easy for the government to use the media to manufacture consent on so many of these issues which have struck us during this pandemic? The Tablighi Jamaat issue or the boycott of Chinese products in the last couple of days. Why have we reached this point? And how do you rationalize this with the newspaper society seeking a tax holiday and customs duty cuts, or are these things linked? So let me just ask you this very last question before we move on.
The joke going around on the net is that there is now an app that will remove all Chinese apps from your phone and computer. The only problem is that it's made in China.
Yeah.
And you know, by the way, just one aside, KP, and that is your newspapers and editorial positions supporting the labor reforms. You have a very prominent editor on his own online TV thing saying, never waste a good crisis.
Yeah.
This is the time to ramp through the labor reforms. So you got those guys on their knees. Don't spare. I mean, this is, what does it say about, the Indian elite and their cruelty and their absolute rapaciousness and ruthlessness towards the less privileged sections of society. Now, about this, I think it's very easy for the government to pressure the media for reasons I've told you, that the media are so heavily locked into dependence on government. Number one, that's one. Their structures and their monies and their profits and their contracts come from what they do with government, either with government advertising or 1,000 other ways in which the government can convenience or inconvenience them. Second, let's face it, there are also a large section of them have really gone the fundamentalist route. A large section of them have subscribed to this, we are a special people, we are the greatest in the world. We've been doing this for 20 years actually, right? That everything that was good invented in history was invented in India and stolen by others.
Yeah.
Right. So we've had that, and we've had a section of the middle class longing to believe that. Now look at the fact that the Solicitor General, I was wondering when Tushar Mehta took off on the media, which media was he talking about? 95% of the media are with him. They are with him. So
no, I think he's talking about us.
Yeah, of course I'm very flattered if he is. I'm truly flattered if he is. So that is again a different thing. But the control of when I said the country is ruled by a coalition of socio-religious fundamentalists and the economic market fundamentalists, their meeting ground or the bed they cohabit in their alliance is what we call them corporate media, the mainstream media, if you will. So it shouldn't surprise us at all. It shouldn't surprise us at all.
Yeah. No, but when you won the Magsaysay Award, were you congratulated by the Editors Guild or any of these organizations? Do you remember?
I don't actually remember receiving a letter from Editors Guild.
I see.
I don't know. I mean, I did receive a lot of, the big editors of the biggest publications. I didn't hear anything from them. and it doesn't matter. I mean, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah,
But
no,
I think it may have been. I did get press council chairman's congratulations and from a lot of political leaders, etc. I can't, very honestly, I can't remember, but I don't think that I got a letter from them saying so. They may have said so somewhere, but I don't remember that.
no. Why I asked you was just an aside, nothing serious, because I think the Editors Guild of India must be the only body on earth which, in one calendar year, has not wished the person who won the Magsaysay Award from within the fraternity, or who have won the Pulitzer Prize in the same year. So I was just thinking that maybe all this is related to India becoming 142.
Oh,
But
certainly. You see, at that time, remember that, I think it becomes more necessary in this year, in that 1 year, because of the political situation. I think precisely because of that, they should have been doing it actively. In my time, that kind of crisis did not exist. I can surely say that a number of people who were members of the Editors Guild rang me up, got me onto their TV program. All that did happen. All
yes,
that happened. All that happened.
yeah.
No question about the fact that there were lots of them who were very happy that I got it and told me that. Yeah.
Well, let's keep it aside. But Sainath Garu, since everyone is keen to hear what you have to say on this huge humanitarian crisis, and since I am a bit of a one-trick pony when it comes to the media, I asked a few friends of mine to send in some questions, and I have chosen a few of them. And I'll be really grateful in this last section if you can please share your thoughts on these questions. The first question is from Anindya Chakraborty, who used to be with NDTV and is an economist in his own right. Anindya asks, why do the rural poor vote for Narendra Modi? Have the various schemes helped the poorest 20% to keep their nose above the water? And is that why they vote for Modi? Is the question he's asking very briefly.
Sorry, I didn't understand. Can you repeat the first part of the question?
Why do the rural poor vote for Narendra Modi? Have the various schemes helped the poorest 20% of the country to keep their nose above the water better than during the UPA period? Is that why they are voting for Modi, the rural poor?
I think that's a very, very overdrawn conclusion, and I don't agree with it. Also, then we have to explain why did the rural poor of largest sections of rural poor in Tamil Nadu and Andhra vote in one way, in Kerala vote in another way, in the north in yet another way. It's not that the rural poor are a homogeneous entity who all voted in one way. That is first. And in different states, you have different things. And in fact, the welfare schemes of the Modi government, such as they are, have been disastrous. Disastrous. So I don't agree with that. And remember that you had a prime minister who came to power on the first day, mocked the National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, said it was a product of corruption, then went on to claim the maximum allocation ever had been made under his rule for it. So I don't think that there's anything to be. What were the schemes of the Modi government? I think, demonetization was the outstanding scheme, and along with GST, which is a joint venture with the Congress party that has brought incredible damage to everybody. Yeah. There were schemes that of a kind of an ongoing nature, like the Food Security Act or this, which to my mind, the present situation has shown are deeply inadequate. NREGS, of which you probably know, I'm a great supporter. I think it's got to be expanded 10 times where it is to cope with millions of people going back to the villages.
Yeah. That's great. So the next question is from Shashi Kumar, our common friend from Madras Asian College of Journalism, the head of the Media Foundation. Shashi asks you, how does this whole thing of the jobless migrants going back home from their distant places of work affect livelihoods and health situation where they go back to? How does it affect their own villages when they go back?
It's alarming beyond description. See, one thing is they're going back to livelihoods which we successfully extinguished in the past 30 years. Yeah. They're going. Why did they leave in the first place? They left in the first place because those livelihoods died. Now they're going back, and by the way, there is a precedent in the last decade, which you can see the kind of things that happened. When the Wall Street collapse occurred in 2008, about 1 lakh Odia workers in Surat were dispossessed of the power loom sector's work.
Mm, mm,
All
mm.
the Western countries and many other countries had cancelled their orders for lakhs and lakhs of garments. Okay,
Yeah.
shirts and whatever. So suddenly, 100,000 Odia migrants in Surat and Ahmedabad, particularly Surat, were completely out of work. There is a train between Odisha and I think it's called the Barampur Ahmedabad Express or something like that. Only people who travel on that is migrants, and it is
I
one of
see.
the highest revenue trains of the Eastern Railways.
I see. I see. I see.
So then what happened? They went back, 40,000, 30,000 of them went back to a single district you know as by the name of Ganjam.
Yeah.
There was all kinds of fallout. You know, in a typical Indian farm, the father is running the farm, the sons are out working, or the eldest brother is running the farm, the other brothers are earning some money, sending remittances home, and at harvest time collecting their share of the produce. Suddenly, there are 4, 5 unemployed guys sitting at home. Property disputes, violence, domestic abuse and violence towards women. The crime rates generally went up. This is what I'm not saying this should happen or it will happen, but I'm saying this is what actually happened. Second, they're going back to a place where we completely destroyed the health systems. The fastest growing component of rural family debt in the last 20 years, the fastest growing, or in some areas, the second fastest growing component of rural family debt is health expenditures. In the thousands and thousands of farmers' suicides for which we have looked at the cause, health expenditures have been deadly in those households.
I see.
They're much greater than what you and I might spend on a crisis in Mysore, Bengaluru, or Mumbai.
Yeah. Yeah.
Bankruptcies have been very, very severely health driven, as that Public Health Foundation told you. In 2016, 55 million Indians went below the poverty line, pushed by health debt and health expenditures, calamitous health expenditures. So you
Yeah.
can have a very good idea of what's. Third, look at the pressure that will now come on land and agriculture, and what the heck it will do to farm labor wages is beyond me. I don't even want to think about it. It's so bleak on that front. Unless we have a very large, giant reconstruction program on the one hand and land reforms on the other, and various forms of ownership, various forms of, some of the great examples are there in Kerala about Kudumbashree and others, where you can have absorb people in work who are even landless. But this is what I think. I think it's a very scary situation when as they arrive back. Right now, by the way, lakhs of them are living in the fields, Krishna Prasad. They're living in the fields because they place barricades at their village,
Absolutely.
which are telling them you quarantine yourself wherever you can before 15 days, 20 days before we let you in.
Yeah.
So they're sitting in the fields in 45, 46, 47 degrees Celsius. Imagine what the impact on health is going to be.
Yeah. 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 Well, the next question is from Swati Maheshwari, who used to be with NDTV in India and in London and is now in Singapore teaching. Swati asks a question which you have basically answered, Sainath Garu, but let me just still put it on the record. How do the two impulses of a fascist Hindu supremacy and a neoliberal economic agenda operate in this government? And what are the contradictions and convergences between these two agendas, and how do we see them playing out in journalism in India? I know you've answered it, but very quickly, if you can just give us a shot.
In one line, that was the whole point I was making, that India is ruled by an alliance of socio-religious fundamentalists and economic market fundamentalists, and the points of convergence are many, and the bed these allies cohabit is called the media.
Yeah, thank you. The fourth question is from Indrajit Gupta, former editor of Forbes magazine in Bombay. who asks many questions, but let me ask you the sexiest one here. What does this effort to start reverse Shramik specials tell us about the influence of big business on policy making?
Well, as you said, look at the confusion and the chaos that we created. March 31st, we are saying in Supreme Court, government is saying no migrants on the street, not a single migrant on the road. On May 31st, on May 28th, government is saying 9.1 million people have been transported by Shramik trains. But the coming of the Shramik trains itself, as Mr. Gupta surely has in mind, remember how much chaos there was that. First we announced, yeah, we will have trains. B, we will have trains and we will charge you full fare. And then they bring out Rajdhani class trains, and imagine those kind of fares. Then they arrange the trains and Mr. Yadiyurappa meets the builders of Bengaluru, who by the way, are also the builders of Mumbai and elsewhere. Okay, I mean,
Yeah.
these are all the usual suspects.
Yeah.
Then you say, no, I can't let you go. It actually amounts to the quelling of an incipient slave revolt. The slaves fleeing Rome and the Spartacus. It's a quelling of an incipient slave revolt. There's an old saying that when the poor get literate, the rich lose their palanquin bearers. That's what happened to us in March end.
Yeah.
So we were not willing to let the remaining palanquin bearers escape.
Absolutely.
So you brought the labor laws. The Shramik trains are an element in that controversy, in that imbroglio. But at least if 9.1 million people got to where they wanted, and even that I'm not so sure when a train meant for one state lands up in another. But if they got home, good for them. I'm happy for them.
Bharat Kumar in Chennai, who's a journalist turned public policy man, asks us a question which is quite nice, which is, will this pandemic provide an opportunity to evolve a robust rural and semi-urban centric economy as opposed to what we now have? Will this kind of change the relationship between villages and cities? Is his question.
Bharat, how much I hope you are right. Unfortunately, the concentration of power in very narrow strata of very narrow classes, it seems to be on the rise. Consider how your political structure is moving. We are watching the fastest dismantling of parliamentary democracy in our history, and the emergency was nothing. It still had a parliament. It still had a tiny minority of opposition leaders who would go to that parliament, storm the parliament, hold the emergency regime to accountability, would be thrown out physically from the parliament, but would be back there again to make a halla over what was going on. Okay, now there is no parliament. There is no e-parliament or virtual parliament which the British managed to hold. There are no legislatures functioning. There are chief ministers completely at the mercy of the center, which not only one has sat with all the GST money which it's not giving out to them, though it's their money. Two, starts the PM Cares Fund, which bleeds the chief minister's relief funds and takes money away from there, to a privately registered trust that is not accountable to the public, that is not accountable to government, that is not accountable to the comptroller and auditor general. And your guess is as good as mine where the thousands of crores, and they won't even tell us how many, are going for that money. So there is no legislature functioning, no chief ministers. The chief ministers are paralyzed. The state governments are struggling. No cabinet is functioning. The only cabinet minister who comes out to say anything is Nirmala Sitharaman, emotes on a written script for her, much of which she doesn't understand very clearly. And no other. So what you're doing, you're running a country. How are you running the country? One man on the reality show every 2 weeks tells the country what to do, when to bank pots and pans, when to light diyas, when to shower petals. Where is your parliamentary or institutional democracies? So I really hope, Bharat, that we are able to make that shift and start looking at the everyday lives of everyday people, which is what we in Pari live for. And we have to sort of, it's not, I think that you need to get away from a corporate centric economy.
Yeah.
I think that country being run for half a dozen huge corporations is not what democracy is about. It's not what you and I should be about. But I think that what you want can be achieved, but that will only come through mass struggle.
Excellent. And the penultimate question is from Satish Acharya, who's the cartoonist earlier based in Bombay,
I know.
now based in beautiful Kundapur. Satish asks a quick question. Will this historic decision of the Modi Sarkar regarding one nation, one market help farmers? I hope you can give me a very quick answer to that.
Satish, first of all, I never had the opportunity to thank you for that brilliant caricature and cartoon that you gave me in when I was in Mangalore and Kundapur actually that day. Thank you for that. First of all, Satish, the idea that one nation, one market, all this kind of stuff came with the GST. And it was always based on a fraud, always based on a lie. So, the United States is the largest capitalist economy on earth. It has a unified capitalist economy. Do you think there is only one rate, one market, one tax across the United States? When I was teaching at Princeton in 2015, or in Berkeley before that, or in Princeton once before that, every time I paid 3 levels of taxes: local taxes, professional taxes there, state taxes, and federal taxes. Now the tax on electronics in New York is 8.5%. In Portland, Oregon, it is 0% because that's the headquarters of Intel. There is a huge complexity, which if you are claiming to be such a great guy in software and IT and sophisticated computer applications, it should not really be a big deal, right? Now what we are doing every time is creating slogans, not policies. Like the entire packages of five or six packages of Ms. Sitaraman were all earlier programs dolled in together and saying 20% of 10% of GDP. It's not even 1%. This one nation, one market. Okay, I love seeing the anchors say, hey, now a farmer in Tamil Nadu or Maharashtra can go and sell products in a UP market. How many farmers who are going to get into their SUV and take their produce to a market in UP? You know who that favors. You know who's going to get that benefit. You know that the farmer is going to lose out in that. So I don't think that is going to happen. I think that you will have more chaos, more trouble with it. And we are not looking at the need of the farmers. We're looking at the needs of corporations.
Super. So the last question, final question, Sainath Garu, is from me, because we've been very serious all this while. Let me ask you a question which I'm sure not too many people ask you. What is the situation in Palagummi, the village in East Godavari that lent you its name? We hear so much from you about every place in India. What is the situation in your own home village? I know you didn't grow up there, but it lent you its name. What do you think the situation there is?
I think, first, as far as I understand historically, there was 2 Palagumis or 1 Palagumi, that village that was displaced, and the present one is now I think in Razole. The one that was historically displaced, I believe, was part of the area of rebellions and uprisings in the Rampa territory and the Rampa uprisings. So what I think there is that people are going to be in very serious trouble. And I thank you for asking me this question, because I want to alert you to the next giant crisis that looms. What is happening in Razole, as in many other places, I would think, I haven't visited there now. Is that if you look at the Pari, you will see from villages in Andhra and Telangana, we have carried stories on paddy procurement centers. Try this physical distancing idea at work in a paddy procurement center when 48 people are handling 128 million tons of paddy, which they've got to heap, pile up, put into sacks, clean, stitch, sew, weigh, and load into trucks in 10 hours, 128 tons. What happens to these people? I have been arguing that every farmer and laborer, every marginal farmer and laborer should get NREGS wages till the crisis is over, regardless of whether work is possible or not, in the interest of their health and survival. That is one that's happening. Second is that if there is one thing that terrifies, a lot of things in this process scare the hell out of me, but if there is one thing that terrifies me, it's the coming Kharif season.
I see.
I am begging my farmers, whether in Palagumi or anywhere else, I am begging them, please, please, in the Kharif season, grow food crop. Grow food crop. The government of India is not distributing seriously the 77 million tons of food grain that it has. It has been like a miser. Why do you pile up bloody buffer stocks precisely for this kind of an emergency? And you are not. You know what they're planning to do? They have given approval officially. The government has given approval for conversion of God knows how many million tons of rice into ethanol to create hand sanitizer. More hands. You're destroying food to create hand sanitizer. You're destroying the life-giving nature of food to create hand sanitizer. Yeah, and you know which people will get it. Second, 77 million tons. Even Jean Drèze, way back in year 2001, calculated that 63 million tons of food grain, if the sacks were laid out in a row, you could go to the moon and back. 2 rows you could build because it's twice the distance. Yeah. Now, I am begging people, please, you are going to be in very serious trouble. Just look at the Rabi crop output. All the cash crop in Rabi is rotting or unsold. The watermelons of Tamil Nadu and Telangana, Nalagonda and Tamil Nadu, Nalagonda and Telangana and in Tamil Nadu, these watermelons are rotting in the field. There is no transportation, no nothing. Supply chains are completely smashed. 80 lakh quintals, 70 to 80 lakh quintals of cotton are lying unsold in this country. Sugarcane, in lakhs and lakhs of tons of sugarcane. If you grow cash crop a second time, who will buy your cash crop? Do you think you're going to export in a period when consumption and incomes have crashed worldwide? Not a chance. I am begging people, please grow food crop for your family, for your family's food security. At least half your cropland, I would say, do the whole thing in food crop, because it's going to be a very hungry nation if we continue not feeding people the way we are now.
Super. So that was Palagumi Sainath, the Magsaysay Award-winning journalist, teacher, activist, thought leader, and policy shaper on the biggest issue that is confronting India today. Do visit the website of People's Archive of Rural India to learn more about the stellar journalism being done by Mr. Sainath and his colleagues. The website address is ruralindiaonline.org. And that is this episode of JPod, the longest of the episodes we have recorded so far. A big thank you to Mr. Sainath for joining us and for his candor and wisdom. And thank you all for listening. And thank you very much, Mr. Sainath, for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.